We know that the Bible is true, God's promises are true, and so we know we don't have to lie, we don't have to hide things. We can seek the Lord to help us, as we start to gain insight. Like, Lord, help me know what to do next, because it's painful to feel these feelings, but we know it's dysfunctional to live and, allow our defense mechanisms to rule us.
When you suffer loss, sometimes you actually enter into this idea of used to be pregnant, used to be secure, used to be sober, used to be an individual that thought that I was going to have a job for the rest of my life. And we have come to realize that although these losses are different, sometimes the coping mechanisms we need are important. And I recognize that the loss of a child is certainly going to affect you in a different way than, say, a loss of a job will, or perhaps infertility would affect you differently than a health reversal. But there are some general principles that I think are going to be very helpful to you, which is why we are going to spend some time today talking about this book. It's been out for about a year. I Used to Be is the title of it, How to Navigate Large and Small Losses in Life and Find Your Path Forward. It is written by Chuck and Ashley Elliott. Chuck earned a bachelor's degree in psychology from Lee University, a master's in behavioral science from Western Kentucky University, and a master's in organizational leadership at Regent University. And Ashley earned a bachelor's in psychology, a master's in mental health counseling at Lee University. Chuck is a pastor at Bethel Church in Evansville, Indiana. Ashley, a licensed counselor in Auxilium Psychological Services. And Chuck and Ashley, welcome to Point of View.
Kirby, thank you so much for having us. It's an honor. We're looking forward to having a chat with you.
Yeah, thanks.
Let me, if I can, Chuck, maybe talk about the fact that as a pastor, you probably have a lot of people that come to you in terms of some kind of loss that they are dealing with. And in some respects, I'm hoping that as we go through this, we can train not only other pastors listening to this program or seminary students or Bible college students, but just generally people to understand that when you're dealing with a loss in your own life, in the life of your family, maybe in your church community, there are some very deliberate steps we can take.
Absolutely. Being in a church, whether you're a pastor or a congregant, you get to be with people in just all kinds of different stages of life. It could be the birth of a child. It could be transitioning into retirement, losing a loved one. So many different things that you get to be a part of when you're in the church, and that's how God designed it. But many times when somebody goes through a loss, they lose a loved one, they go through a job change, they maybe get fired or let go, they have something major happen in their life, people don't always know what to say to that individual who's gone through a loss. And unfortunately, they often say nothing. Sometimes they think they have to make a comment like they're going to fix it, like, well, God's got a plan, or maybe God needed another angel, and somebody says that about the loss of a child, and something that just stings. And what I've found is leaning in and not feeling like you need to fix it, but you just need to be with that person and have a conversation. Don't ignore them or ignore the pain that they're going through. And that's a great first step that we often see many churches, church leaders, individuals just don't take.
Ashley, let me come to you because, of course, the title of the book is I Used to Be, and one part of that is I used to be expecting a child, and then you begin to talk about the loss of a child, then another loss, and then another. And in some respects, I'd love to have you speak to that because as people hear some of the advice that you and Chuck are giving, you're fellow travelers. You've been there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was 2015, 16, and 17. We went through recurrent miscarriage, and so year after year, we kept facing loss. And we definitely faced different experiences and different emotions. The first time we were in the ER, and we worshiped God. The second time, it was more shocking because we had taken a year to pray and grieve, and thought, no, not again. And then that third time, just like a gut punch. And I remember looking at my baby, that his heart was still. I was like, what happened to you, little guy? And we delivered him, and he was a son, and held him in our arms, and just the devastation of how, we used to be expecting. Like, we just even yesterday were thinking about names and all these things, and just sometimes it's a slow fade where we realize that we're not who we used to be, but sometimes it is this automatic shift. And it's not just a title change that affects our identity in Christ, our identity in our family, but it can really affect our ability to function. And we can feel like, I used to be stable. I used to be whole. I used to be a lot of other things. And so that's part of the reason why we've used that title, because we found that it resonates with people. When they see the book, they go, whoa, like there's some pain points there. And we don't intend to hurt people, but we do want them to realize like there's some things that could be healed. And that's what we believe what God's done in us. And we've been able to walk with other people through that process. And that's what we're bringing, hopefully, counseling in a book, some ministry in the book, as we wrote this book.
Let me just mention that we do have a link to your website. We also have a link to Facebook. Also have a separate connection there to your YouTube videos. And, of course, most importantly, this book, which has been out for some time, you should be able to find it in your local bookstore. Although since it's been out for a while, maybe you would want to provide the link or use the link that we've provided to you. I Used to Be, How to Navigate Large and Small Losses in Life, Chuck and Ashley Elliott. It is published by Revell, which is a division of Baker. And there are 5 sections: Seeing Myself, Seeing My World, Seeing My Loved Ones, Reframing Grief, and Moving Forward. Well, Chuck, let me get into that first section, because part of it is the issue of grief, but also one of the chapter titles is Naming My Grief. Sometimes we have this free-floating emotion, but sometimes we need to understand what is exactly affecting us, don't we?
Absolutely. I really like that you pointed that out. That's one of my favorite things from the book, honestly, because many times after somebody goes through a loss or they go through a major identity change, they just know that they don't feel good. And Kirby, you've probably seen this before. Somebody doesn't really want to talk about the thing. They just want to talk about how they don't feel very good, or they want to disengage. And actually naming what it is that you've lost or who it is that you've lost is so powerful. So let me give you an example. You can say that you're having a hard time, or you're sad, or you're just not really feeling it. But if you actually name it and say, you know what, I really miss Gary. I miss that I don't get to go to dinner with him. I'm sad that he's not sitting at the kitchen table when I wake up in the morning. Actually being able to go through and name what it is or who it is and the identity that you maybe had is powerful. When you say, well, I don't feel like I have much purpose now. But what if you said, I really miss that I had a job. I miss that I don't have someplace to go in the morning and people know my name. That's a different thing. Then you're getting to what actually hurts, and you can do something with that. You can say, okay, I need to have community. I need to re-engage. I need to do some things. Not that it replaces the memory of a Gary that you've lost or your job, but it helps you to recognize this is specifically where I'm hurting. And when you do that, we find that in our coaching and counseling, that's where we often start when we think about how are we going to navigate this and how are we going to continue to build.
Yeah, it exposes an unmet need. And when we know that unmet need, then we can seek the Lord, seek counsel to how to meet that need in a healthier way.
And Ashley, we were talking about this idea of grief, and I think it also ties into something you talk about early on, and that is this idea of unmet expectations. You know, there are individuals, maybe the men say, well, I was hoping I might have made a baseball team in college, or I might have been able to make the basketball team, or I was hoping I would be at this level in my career at the age of 30. For women, it might be I wanted to pursue a career, but I also wanted to be a mom. The unmet expectation of I thought I'd be a mom by now, and I've had 3 miscarriages. It seems to me that that's another part of really understanding who you are and why you're feeling that grief, don't you think?
Yes, definitely. I think that whenever we go through these different situations where we have unmet expectations, we can shift either to a positive space or a negative space. And oftentimes those unmet expectations lead us to be stuck in a negative space. So we call this process switch theory. Like we can switch back and forth between a positive and negative space. And our goal is to help people become intimately familiar with their negative space and what it looks like, and even their positive space. But often that's not as problematic. That's not why people come to us for help.
Yeah.
But some people they just want to live up in the clouds and, abandon reality or sweep things under a rug. And that's their coping. So we teach people, like, examine your coping mechanisms. What are your good habits? What are your negative habits? And all of that is kind of surrounding around those unmet expectations, or the overall expectations, and then the negative space tends to come when those expectations are unmet.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes if people come to us and they feel as if they're unhappy or they're disengaged and other problematic symptoms are popping up, if you trace it back, there's an unmet expectation. So if you have conflict in your marriage, it could be because you haven't communicated an unmet expectation. You thought you were going to spend more quality time together, and then you didn't communicate the expectation. Maybe you did, didn't. And then when that's not met, you become disengaged. But the good thing is we've seen it time and time again that people can get back to a positive space and re-engage when they communicate from what it is that they wanted. Well, what's your expectation? Well, I want to be close to you. I want to spend time with you. I want to have date nights with you. Although you might be acting like a jerk at the time, you want to be with your partner.
So well said. Let me just mention that there are places where people can fill things out. For example, you have positive coping mechanisms, negative coping mechanisms, and positive ones are allowing yourself to feel community, giving back. Negative are sleeping for days, self-medication, isolation, denial, whatever. And there's a place for you to fill it out. And that's in Chapter 3. But if I might jump ahead for just a second, since you both mentioned this, some of that gets to, in Chapter 7, the defense mechanisms. Some have grown up in households, for example, where denial is not just a river in Egypt. You know, denial exists, and you have repression, you have displacement, you have rationalization. And that's one of the things that help you actually deal with that particular disaster, that loss, that pain, isn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely a coping mechanism, but learning, just that awareness. I am doing this. I am in denial. Okay, well, there's a good reason. Like, we don't do things for bad reasons. We rationalize because we want to feel better. We are in denial because it's painful to look at the truth. And so we know that the Bible is true. God's promises are true. And so we know we don't have to lie. We don't have to hide things. We can seek the Lord to help us, as we start to gain insight. Like, Lord, help me know what to do next, because it's painful to feel these feelings, but we know it's dysfunctional to live and, allow our defense mechanisms to rule us.
And that's one of the freeing things that we see when we get to work with couples and individuals is when you help them to not just feel bad about themselves for what they're doing, but understanding they're doing it because they want to feel better and they're trying to get back something that could even be virtuous. So we have 3 sons. They're 14, 12, and 6 years old. And there could be a time that possibly, maybe other people experience this as well, there's a little bit of conflict between a couple of the boys. And say if the 14-year-old wants to punch the 12-year-old.
This is all theoretical.
Yeah, all theoretical.
All theoretical, yeah. We've never had any of that in any of our other families.
Never have, as I think about some of the marks on the walls. Okay, but imagine that the 14-year-old wants to hit the 12-year-old because he's offended. Why does he do that? Well, it's bad to punch somebody, okay, right? But it's because he feels hurt. He feels as if something he cares about has been violated. So that means my older one wants to protect something that he thinks is right. He wants to protect the truth. He wants to protect his things. He wants to value something that is noble underneath it. Is the methodology of punching your brother correct? Absolutely not. But focusing on what is it you were trying to protect or preserve, and what do you care about that was violated, that's so much more empowering, and that's something that we can work with. And then we look and see, okay, how are we coping with the unmet expectation of your brother when he takes your things?
And that goes back to those unmet needs and unmet expectations, that we got to understand where our needs are unmet and how do we meet them, because with our kids, of course, they're going to do things, make mistakes, but we want to meet the need. And when we do, we find that negative behavior lightens up. And we see the same thing, especially with our couple-to-couple coaching that we do.
Sure.
We see that as they just talk about their feelings and slow down a little bit, they start to find hope again. And that's where it's so rewarding to see people find hope when they thought that it was lost. And this happens, if somebody's gone through, a big grief, if they've lost a loved one due to death or divorce, and it can happen in a lot of different contexts as well.
Might just mention one of the individuals we have on the program with some regularity is Dr. Gregory Jantz, and he says, without properly managing our hurt and disappointment, our emotions can take us down a path of even greater pain. Chuck and Ashley, because of their own deep pain and loss, offer a plan to push through fear and restore and rebuild our emotional health. And there's a plan of hope in these pages. And Chuck, you mentioned something in passing I thought we'd camp out on for just a minute, and that is when you counsel couples. Now, there's some people listening right now that said, I'd really like to spend some time with the two of you and see if you could help us out, but I don't live in Evansville, Indiana. But if you go to the website, which we have, chuckandashley.com, there's a button to actually see coaching availability online. So it seems to me that there could be an opportunity for people either to interact with you online or, especially since the book is out, maybe even having you come and do a seminar at their church or something like that. So talk about what would be available to some of our listeners if this book has already, and this conversation already piqued their interest.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Ashley and I see people all around the country for coaching virtually. So we'll do couple-to-couple coaching virtually. And if you don't live in our area, that is okay. That's a high percentage of what we do is that. But we also do marriage workshops and marriage intensives, and we love doing that. We've gone into churches all around and do Friday night, Saturday, all day long seminars, speaking on lots of different topics, really focused on marriage and relationships, but on grief as well. So that's something that we love to engage in.
Yeah, we love to help people, invest in their own marriage and seeking the Lord. So we call spiritual intimacy. Like, people often don't feel comfortable praying together. It's embarrassing or it makes them nervous. And so just some of these simple conversations, just asking couples to have those conversations. And sometimes it is around grief, that the couples haven't processed the grief, or maybe the woman is frustrated at the husband because he seems to be fine, and that's just the way he copes. So helping people to create a space where they can talk about these deeper feelings that oftentimes we just barrel through instead of taking the time to deal with.
And people can reach out to either one of us, but you can find our contact information at chuckandashley.com and talk about what would be a good fit, whether that's sessions, times, conferences, speaking engagements, all of those things. We welcome the conversation.
Now, Chuck's about to start a men's coaching program, too. So that's another option.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Again, we have a link to chuckandashley.com. You can go there directly, or, of course, we have it available on our website at pointofview.net. There's a button there for coaching availability. There's also one in which you might want to receive their monthly relationship resources. So you can give your email and follow up with that. But let's take a break, and when we come back, we've been talking about grief, but let's get into it in a little more detail. First of all, the permission to allow ourselves to grieve, how grief impacts an intimate relationship and what that means, and then a whole section, which we'll get to hopefully before the end of the hour, on reframing grief, seeing grief from a new perspective, and how that, I think, is going to be really helpful as well. And if you are right now in the midst of suffering some kind of pain or loss or discouragement, I hope you'll stay with us. And I thought, Ashley, for just a minute, we might just talk about this idea of grief. First of all, maybe give yourself permission to grieve, even permission to be angry with God or to be frustrated or confused. But that isn't a blanket revision, because sometimes you say there are times when you shouldn't give yourself permission to grieve. So help us through this, because we talk about this idea of processing grief or managing grief, but sometimes the biggest problem is people just think it's somehow unspiritual to even feel grief. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think people oftentimes will not give themselves permission to grieve, like, oh, I should be strong, or I should be over this by now. I talked to someone this week that's like, it's been 2 years. I probably should be better by now. And we believe it's not time that heals, it's what you do with the time. So if you spend your time burying it, not giving yourself permission to grieve, you're probably going to feel stuck. And so if you feel stuck, that's okay. That can be normal, even if you've been trying to face it. But giving yourself space to look at what you're trying to do with it. So that piece of, like, we don't want to give people permission to do anything. We don't want to sin because of it. And so if we find ourselves continually feeling tempted to, like, end our life, for example, or just isolate and never be around people, we want to look deeper and get support and get help. But we want to give people permission to look grief directly in the face.
And when we say give ourselves permission to grieve, sometimes we'll ask people when they say, well, I should be over this by now. We're like, says who?
Yeah.
Who told you that
Great
you have
question.
to be over this?
Yeah.
Who is this? Just something in your head that you feel like, well, I feel like if I'm honest with people, I'm going to make them sad if I'm around them too much. Okay. Like, well, what does that mean? You don't even know that that's true to start off with. But there's so much thinking that we help people to break down and get through because they feel these pressures that they have put on themselves or they have fabricated in their mind that other people have this pressure on them or societal norms or whatever it might be. And especially in our Western culture, people have a very different viewpoint on what it means to grieve. It's like, all right, suck it up. You took 2 days off. You went to the funeral. Get back to work.
Yep.
Yeah. And in our faith, I think it can be really hard for people, as Christians, the culture, like, we want to put a Christian bumper sticker on it. You're like, oh, aren't you better? Glad they're in a better place. And we're just realizing sometimes that really hurts the person who's grieving, and they might feel like they're not spiritual enough because those things don't help. They actually make them angry. And so we kind of normalize it. Like, it's okay if you feel angry if somebody says something that honestly is kind of dumb or theologically off in those moments, but we can give ourselves permission to look at those things, to bring God into it. And even if ultimately the person is very angry at God, sweeping it under a rug does not help heal that relationship. And so we want to help people bring God into those negative spaces, because just like Adam and Eve, when they sinned in the garden, they hid. They didn't feel probably worthy of God's presence. And so I think that we're still facing that as humans, that we still have this tendency to hide when we feel unworthy, or if we just feel upset and we think that we're supposed to have it all together. And so we want to help people feel like it's okay to approach the Lord, and even if it is telling him that we're upset.
One of the things I thought we might focus on, since you're talking about avoiding, you have a section there about avoidant behavior. And Ashley, when your grandfather was alive, you would oftentimes go to the local Burger and Shake Shack and the movies and things of that nature. When he passed away, you didn't want to go to the movies or the restaurant for a while, which is understandable. But there is a sense in which sometimes we hide out. And since you talk about that in the book, can you explain that?
Yeah, I think that, giving ourselves space to, heal and say, okay, I'm not going to go there for a little while is good. But then whenever we find that we have 10 places that we avoid and we don't want to go, and we get angry if somebody invites us or some of that, that is an indicator that maybe that's become a negative coping. And so for a little while, right, undefined, we don't give an exact time, but if there are some extreme pain points that we feel, we just want to give people that nudge to say, okay, what else is underneath the surface? What happens if you go? And as we've found, like, we've healed, and when other people heal, they tend to come to a place where they would maybe want to go. And so there was a time with me and my mom, we went back to that Shake Shack and we had a great time, and it was actually probably tears at some point, but the server was someone who had served my grandfather. And so it just was this poignant moment that we were like, man, we could have missed out on just this little conversation that we had, and a moment where we remembered him. And I know for me, I want to be remembered when I pass away. I don't want to be swept under a rug or, compartmentalized and tried to be avoided. And so we want to just give people a place to do that. And so those places can become less of a trigger when we address them, pray through them, talk through them, whatever it is.
And we're always practicing how we handle things mentally and relationally. We find that if people through grief, if they continue to compartmentalize and think that they can hide certain parts of their life and say, well, I just don't drive past that restaurant. Well, I don't talk about that. Well, I don't use that type of condiment anymore in our house because it reminds me of so-and-so or this person lost. If they do those things, they are practicing shutting down parts of their mind, their heart, their emotionally, and you cannot selectively numb. If you think you can do that and you're still going to be engaged at work and be as good of a leader, if you think you're going to be able to continue to give great sermons as a pastor, if you think that you're going to be a wife and be able to look your kids in the eye and go deep with them and feel what they're feeling in the moment, it's not going to happen in the same way. So when we talk to people about going through and working through grief, it's not just for the purpose of feeling sad so you can feel sad. Not that feeling sad is wrong, but what we're trying to teach people is we want you to be engaged in the rest of your life. And when you continue to not deal with the things that hurt in your life, you're walking around on a broken foot and it's not getting fixed.
Well said. Well, we want to talk about change, and of course there are so many ways in which you describe that, but let's talk about the 3 A's: aware, assess, and act, because it does seem to me that ultimately we want to process grief or handle it, actually come out on the other side. So perhaps for just a minute, Chuck, you could help us understand how to apply those 3 A's to bring about the kind of change that we really would want to achieve.
Absolutely. And we see the 3 A's to change helping people in all kinds of areas of their life, whether that be they want to make a fitness change, weight loss, change their relationship, or how they're processing a loss. And you already listed them out for us. We appreciate that. But becoming aware of what is off, what needs to get changed, what's the goal, what is it that's going on, and then naming it, like we talk about in the book. Being aware that, you know what, my relationship is not very good with my wife or my husband, and our communication patterns are bad. And then you get into some of the other A's and what it is that you're going to do. And I'm going to invite Ashley to help me out and explain some of this because she does it pretty well as well.
Yeah, but if you take an example of someone at work, I can't function at work. I broke down and cried, or I can't, get promoted anymore. I just am very stuck because of my grief. That might be the thing that their pain point. So that's the aware piece. And then the second one is to assess. And so we say, what are my options? I can look for a different job, but wait, my grief's going to go with me. We want people to be creative and thinking of the solutions, but you're going to assess and go, what have I tried? What could I try in the future? And when we're looking at what we've tried and say, okay, well, I've tried to deal with grief on my own. I tried reading a book. All right, I need to try something else. I need to maybe get a counselor, talk to a pastor, talk to my spouse or friend, but we're helping them to brainstorm, assessing what their options are.
You're thinking of all kinds of options, things you tried before, things you could try in the future, and then you act. That's the 3rd A of the 3 A's to change. You pick one and you try it. And something that we do and the people we work with is we are hope dealers. So when that first thing that you try doesn't work, it is our job to be hopeful and motivational that, you know what, we're going to try another one. We're going to go back to that list of things that you came up with in the assess stage, and we're going to try another one. Okay, we're finding things that don't work. But the option of just staying the same and not trying to work on this thing that you become aware of is just not viable, and we're not going to do that. So you become aware, you assess, come up with your options, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and then you pick one, and you keep on doing it, and people do find change.
And we've been talking about, of course, the issue of loss and how to navigate that. We've talked about grief. And Ashley, I thought we might get into this because one of the issues is reframing your grief, and that means reframing your relationships. And you talk about the fact that a large part of your support system is Chuck. And I would imagine a lot of women listening right now have said, yes, I have wanted my husband to be part of that support system, but either he's checked out or I'm single and he's not there. And that's part of the issue here because people are dealing with family, friends, their immediate family, their extended family, their community, their church family. Sometimes this idea of reframing grief is perhaps some of the hardest work, isn't it?
Yes. Reframing can feel like a slap in some sense that we're like, you're just telling me to think different. But there is a Bible verse that God says, don't think like everyone else does. And I think that that's encouraging that just because we see everyone else negative around us or if we're feeling that doesn't mean that that's what we have to accept. And so a first step is like to invite God into that process because it's like a landmine of triggers. When you go through a hard time, you look out and you see someone who's married and that feels like a trigger. And you're like, this is the solution. But just bringing God into it, saying, Lord, I don't have what I need, but I do have you. And so I have everything I need. And then help me fill in the gaps with having conversations to meet those needs.
And I think going there and saying, okay, it could be easy, just not easy. Let me reframe that. It could be more common to say, I just don't have the people in my life who care about me. But if you think about what are the elements that you're needing, I need someone to spend time with me. And I feel too embarrassed to ask someone to come to my house and just listen to me as I talk about the pain that I'm going through. And if you think about, well, I don't have anybody else to help pick up the kids on this day, and you feel alone. Or you realize I don't have somebody to talk to when it's about 10:30 at night or midnight, and you feel like you're alone. We've found over and over again that there are more people willing to help someone than what we act like there is. Because, Kirby, if I were to ask you if you would help somebody who's having a hard time at 11 o'clock at night or maybe early in the morning, and they're like, you're the hope for them, you'd probably say yes. It's like, yeah, I don't want to leave that person and abandon them. But when it's reversed, we'd say, You know what? I don't think anybody wants to be there for me. I don't think anybody would pick up the phone. But if it was reversed, we'd do that for somebody else. And going through some of that faulty thinking helps us to reframe things.
Yeah, I think the enemy wants us to feel stuck and hopeless, and reminding ourselves that we can bring God into our negative spaces, and he helps bring that to light and remind us of the truth that he really is there for us, and that we do have family, all of those things that can be helpful. And also even acknowledging that all of this might say, it sounds good, but it's way too hard. Like, that can be an indication that we're in a negative space, and that's okay. We just want to acknowledge it, and that first step is really acknowledging it before we can reframe it.
I think that's a good point, because it is messy and it is hard. Like, going through this, just because we wrote a book on it and just because we've been with a difficult time, doesn't mean it's easy. Just because Ashley's a licensed counselor and we've been doing this for years and years doesn't mean that, oh, we don't have problems. No, sometimes we just realize it stinks, it hurts, I don't want it to be this way. God, I feel like I'm trying to talk to you, and I don't feel like you're answering me.
And I want to shorten that length in time before I bring God into my space.
Absolutely.
Because, I mean, I even had a client one time, I'm not going to pray today, maybe tomorrow. I was like, she's at least aware that she's not one to pray.
Put it on the calendar for tomorrow.
But I feel like it has been a big progress step for me to be able to say,
right,
I pretty much pray pretty quickly after even a negative experience. And so it's harder some days than others. And so, like you said, Chuck, we're not perfect, and we still struggle in it. But part of that can be helpful and freeing. So as people are listening, know that you're not alone if you wrestle with that.
Chuck, I wanted to really, since you were talking about people that might be influential, talk about your friend Larry, diagnosed with cancer, and then, of course, dies. And it's tempting to say, well, I won't think about those individuals because it's so painful that I no longer have Larry, who you say was a mentor and an influential leader in your life. But we don't have to live that way, as I think we can have positive, sometimes even negative remembrances of a person that has passed on. And I can't think of anybody in our listening audience that probably hasn't lost a loved one and wonders, how do I deal with that?
Yeah, absolutely. We have different things around our house and in our offices that help us to process and remember the people that we loved and that we've lost, maybe just in some bite-sized pieces. So it was just a couple of weeks ago, I did the funeral of a friend of mine, and I'd known her for years, and it was hard. It was really hard. It was one of the most difficult funerals that I've done, and I took her obituary and the paper that the funeral home gives you, and I put it in a place right next to where I keep Larry's. And it's the notes from the sermon that I preached at Larry's funeral. And it's right next to a card that says A+ on it after one of the times that I preached, and Larry heard me preach. And it's hard even right now for me to communicate those things, but I don't want to be shut off from it. I don't want to be shut off from connections and having a mentor again in my life, or me being a mentor for somebody else, because I've shut down something that was so meaningful and beautiful in my life. And there's ways we can do that. I also have other things that are on our front porch, a wooden star that one of our friends gave us, and she passed away from cancer as well. And I don't do this to try to make myself sad as I'm walking through the house. If people listening to this right now think that I'm crazy for doing it. But these are small pieces of me remembering the people that I've loved and that I care about. And I want to tell my sons about Larry. And what if I shut down my feelings of grief and sadness about my loss of Larry, and my sons didn't receive a blessing? This is part of the legacy that we want to leave. And we think about, okay, what is it that I loved about this? I love it when people invest in other people. I love it when somebody feels seen. I love it when somebody's passionate about evangelism. Those are the things that I remember about him. And wouldn't it be sad if I didn't give those things to my kids?
Again, the book is entitled I Used to Be, How to Navigate Large and Small Losses in Life and Find Your Path Forward. We also have a link to chuckandashley.com. There's a button there that you can find out a little bit more about coaching availability. If you want both a man and a woman's perspective and willing to put in some work, that is something I might point you to. Also, I have a link to their YouTube channel. if you'd like to watch them in action. And so you can go to YouTube and find that, but we have all those links available at the website. And so Chuck and Ashley, thank you, first of all, for writing the book. Thank you for giving us an hour today, and I suspect there'll be a number of people that will want to contact you in the future.
Well, thanks so much for having us, Kirby. I appreciate your work and for having us today.
No, this has been really good. I appreciate the care and attention that you gave to the topic, and really enjoyable. Thank you for your interview.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you appreciated our conversation today. For more information on what we talked about, check out the links in the description of this episode or go to our website, pointofview.net. If you like this episode, follow us, tell a friend, and rate us so that we can continue bringing you the best highlights from Point of View. We'll see you next time right here on Point of View Highlights.